Tonight we have 7 stories, from haunted mansions, shadow people, and just people. We have some truly horrifying ones for you tonight. All of these stories were sent to the channel's subreddit. If you'd like to join and potentially send in your own story, it is r/slumberreads. I would love to share your story with everyone here. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Hey, are you ready? I turned to my friend Carlos, who asked me the question. He held one hand on the old iron bars of the large gate that stood before us. I turned my gaze to our destination beyond the gate, a large, dilapidated mansion. I clutched the side of my messenger bag. Carlos began to climb up the bars. As he made it to the top, he held out his hand. Hey, come on, he said. I glanced one more at the mansion. Then, with a reassuring nod, I reached for his help up. Once over the gate that stood in our way, we slowly traversed our way toward the dilapidated mansion. A cool night breeze brushed right behind us. The dried dead leaves of the small flower garden tried its best to sway with the breeze. I looked up to see a large oak tree that had been split down the middle of its trunk. I felt Carlos nudge me on the shoulder. Guess that happened during last week's storm, he said. Carlos walked over to the trunk, aiming his flashlight over it. Man, I wish I could have saw it when it happened. To see a bolt come down and bam, he said. That would have been awesome. Hey, let's focus here, I said, crossing my arms. Don't forget our time doesn't start until we're inside. Carlos sighed and pushed right by me. Yeah, let's go then. With every step he made, I heard the groans of the wood. Hey, be careful. The wood's kind of old, I said. I pressed the tip of my shoe against one piece, making sure it was sturdy. Oh, will you relax? Sure, this place is old, but that doesn't mean every piece of wood is going to fall in. The loud sound shook us. I looked at Carlos to see a face of silent anger fill him. He stared right at me. Don't, he said, holding up a finger. Just come over here and help me pull my leg out. After taking a few minutes to pull him out, the two of us made it inside. Carlos shined his flashlight over the entrance of the mansion. He shone it upward, showing off the entire upper floor. He let out an excited whistle. Man, he said, what a mansion. I shook my head. Really? That line? Hey, that's a famous line. How can you visit a mansion and not say it? He said. Come on, let's get started, I said. I pulled out my phone, clicking on the live stream feature. I aimed the camera at us. Hey everyone, it's Alan and Carlos here live streaming our night at the Sonno mansion, here in Beaufort, South Carolina. What's up? Carlos said. He began to act like a wannabe thug behind me. Ignoring my friend for the moment, I said, while holding back a laugh. We are here tonight because we've been challenged by our classmates to stay here from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Now, for those who don't know, this mansion was built somewhere in the 50s. I turned my phone around to show off the mansion. Though large as it is, with 2 floors, this place actually only housed one person. One guy had this all to himself. I could see myself doing that, Carlos said. Yeah, knowing you would have just used about 4 of the rooms, I said. Hey, at least every other room would be clean. If I trashed one, I could just move to the next. Carlos stood proud with his statement. Okay, back to the story, I said, turning the camera back to me. The mansion housed only one person, a man by the name of Sonno. Not much is really known about this person. Many of the old folks in town stated he never really left the mansion, only to pick up the minimal supplies needed for survival. So he never held any wild parties or banged any chicks? Carlos asked. He had stepped over to a small coffee table, going over the dusty items that laid on it. Sadly, no. It is said that he just up and disappeared one day, I said. Carlos turned to me with a raised eyebrow. How do they know that? Carlos did his best impression of a girl. Really? What is that voice? I asked. It's like someone who asked that question trying to be a viewer, he said. Oh, okay. I said, not wanting to engage in one of Carlos's random conversations. Well, it stated that when Mr. Sonno didn't come into town for one of his normal supply runs, which he had always done on the same day of each month around 11 a.m., the owner had sent his son with Mr. Sonno's supplies. I walked further into the mansion. the croaking groans of the wooden floor echoing under me. The owner's son never got a response upon arriving, and after a couple hours, he and his father along with the police stormed into the house. They searched and searched, but never found Mr. Sonno. Carlos picked up a candlestick from the coffee table. He brushed away the dust to inspect it. I saw him doing this, but ignored it. Many say that he left in the middle of the night. Others say he was murdered and buried somewhere on the grounds. But who is to really know what happened to Mr. Sonno? Suddenly Carlos ran up behind me shouting, "So who's ready to explore an old-ass mansion and maybe see a spooky ghost?" I jumped in shock, dropping my phone to the floor. I turned around to him and slugged him right in his shoulder. "Damn it, don't do that," I shouted. "Now help me look for my phone." "Damn, your punches hurt." Carlos rubbed his shoulder. He aimed the flashlight to my feet. The bright green case of my phone sparkled in the light. I let out a sigh of relief knowing it wasn't cracked. Thank goodness. Sorry about that, everyone. My friend can be a jerk at times. I said as my eyes narrowed over to him. Carlos began to walk nonchalant in front of me. "I don't know what you mean," he said, finishing off with an innocent whistle. I turned to my camera with a cautious smile. "Well, let's venture forth." For about the next 3 hours, Carlos and I traveled further inside the mansion, showing off all the rooms we found. The dining hall was large, with a long table that stretched from one end of the room to the other. There were even chairs seated about it, a strange thing indeed for a mansion that only housed one person. Dinnerware was even set, as if Mr. Sonno had expected to entertain, but when we entered the kitchen, there wasn't even that much food for such a large group. Though as Carlos and I spoke, we came to the decision that maybe there was enough, but because of his sudden disappearance, it was taken away, or that the supplies on that day were in fact for the dinner. Whatever the case may be, just the sight of the dinner table felt off, like it was too planned to be set up like that. Before I could discuss how I felt with Carlos, he had rushed over, taking my phone into his hands. He held it to face his face. I'm pretty sure the sight the viewers saw jump scared them worse than earlier. "Now," he said, "let us continue. I think we should check upstairs." "Wait, why upstairs when we haven't finished all the rooms here?" I said. Carlos turned away from the phone. "Man, the only place the bottom floor has are the entrance, kitchen, dining, living room, and maybe a restroom. The upstairs has all the other rooms," he said. "Let's go." "Isn't the point of our night here for us to explore everything?" I asked. I reached out for my phone, but Carlos moved out of my grasp. "Hey, we can check those out later. Let's go upstairs. We can probably get a good view for our audience of the outside from his bedroom or something," he said. "Yeah, I guess," I said, getting more frustrated that I couldn't get my phone. "Just hand me my phone back." Carlos held out his hand with my phone. Right as my fingertips touched it, he quickly ran off. "Hey," I shouted. "Be careful. If you run like that, you're bound to get stuck and..." A loud snapping sound echoed from down the hall where Carlos ran. I hung my head down, letting out the deepest sigh I ever had. "So yeah, can I get some help?" Carlos asked. "I hate you so much," I said. After rescuing Carlos's leg a second time from the wooden floors, we made our way to the upstairs. It was pretty much just a long hallway with rooms lined along it. We stepped carefully into each other, examining everything. From what we discovered, the first 4 rooms were guest rooms, with one room in between being restrooms. The last room in the hall was the master bedroom. Like everything else in this mansion, it was completely covered in dust and cobwebs. Man, this guy sure had a lot of rooms with nothing going on. Carlos' son. Just what the hell did this guy do here? I walked to the bed. On the right side, the cupboard was folded, like the way a person would exit the bed upon waking up. I guess this was the last thing he must have done that day, as he disappeared. I sat down on that dust-covered bed. Carlos walked over, aiming the camera in my face. "What are you doing?" Just think, he had woken up that day, and then suddenly he was gone. I looked at the corner that sat near the bed. It's crazy. "So are you going to get any visions of him, or feel his spirit?" Carlos asked. He moved the camera from side to side, making his attempt at ghost wails. "Stop that before you give some viewer motion sickness." "Hey, thinking of that, do we even have any viewers?" Carlos looked at the phone. "Doesn't look like it. Oh, wait, really? I said. I got off the bed, rushing over to him. I grabbed the phone, checking the live viewer feed. 0? I shouted. Those sobs. I growled up my breath. Hey man, at least we have proof we came here, Carlos said. Yeah, I guess. But they said they were going to watch it and make sure we did it, I said. I'm beginning to feel like they did this as a joke. Carlos put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. So, Richard and Daniel aren't watching? Screw them. This is something everyone does in their senior year. The mysterious Sonno mansion. Everyone stays here to test their courage. I shook my head. Yeah, but this is nothing. Why did we even decide to do this? Suddenly a past memory flooded my mind. I turned, digging a sharp glare into Carlos. It was you. I forgot you roped me into this with you. You started acting all high and mighty over those two, and then got me involved. Carlos placed another hand on my shoulder. It's because we're friends. What the hell does that mean? Carlos chuckled. He aimed the flashlight over a fireplace that sat in the master bedroom. He looked upward to see a large oil painting of a man, or at least it was a man we thought. The old painting was someone dressed in a suit, but his hands and face were covered in bandages. Is that Mr. Sonno? Carlos asked. I guess. But no one ever said he wore bandages, I said. I guess he was burned badly. Carlos then snapped his fingers as he had figured something out. Maybe that's why he never did anything. You're saying he was scared people would judge him over his bandages? Then why didn't anyone in town mention it? I said. Carlos judged. Old age is a bitch. I shook my head. Well, let's head back downstairs. I want to see the study. You might have kept a journal in there. Carlos gave one more glance at the painting. Nice place, man. We arrived to the study located in the back of the mansion. Upon entering the room, we were surprised by what we saw. Though it still contains dust like the other rooms, this room held more in it than all the others combined. One wall and a half were a large bookcase, filled with books from top to bottom. A desk sat in the corner in an angle with a chair. On the desk sat a large glass tank that held many cracks. A few beakers and vials were scattered on the desk as well. In the other corner, near a large stained glass window, was a large red chair. A small table nest near it with a meltdown candle and a few books piled upon it. Whoa, this room, Carlos said. I scanned over the books on the wall. These books, I said. Hey Carlos, aim your light over here. Carlos took a seat in the large red chair. He aimed his light at the wall. I scanned over the books. Interesting, I said. What, did you find something that makes you geek out? Carlos asked. Not really, but about half of these books are scientific and horror. I pulled out one book titled The Slumbering Tale. I placed my phone on the bookcase as I skimmed through the book. I guess he was a scientist, but a lover of horror. Hey, Carlos lit up with an idea. What if he summoned something with those books and it killed it? No, wait. What if he got trapped in one of those books? I gave him a worrying look. And you say I'd be geeking out. Hey, it makes you wonder since he up and disappeared, Carlos said. Yeah, it's a mystery, I said. I shut the book and shoved it into my messenger bag. I stepped over to the desk. Besides the large glass tank, beakers, and vials, there were pages scattered about with crude drawings of creatures. Weird, I said. What's weird is you taking that book, Carlos said. Hey, come look at this. Carlos held the phone out, filming me as he walked over. What is it? He aimed the phone down. He saw the drawings and leaned in forward. Man, what was this guy doing? On one piece of paper, I tapped my finger over a formula written on it. This guy, Mr. Sonno, I think he was doing some experiments. Like what? Carlos asked. Carlos took a step back, hitting the bookcase. Oh shit. Suddenly he noticed a certain book slightly sticking out. He peered at the title, even aiming the phone at it. Guida Falsa. What? I asked, turning to him. The book. I wonder what it's about. Carlos pulled out the book, but it stayed put halfway. Then the ground shook, and the wall of books slid half, revealing an opening. Carlos and I stood in shock at the secret door we had discovered. Okay, that's cool, he said. I stepped past him, looking into the pitch blackness. What the hell is down there? Upon realizing what I saw, I turned to see Carlos grinning. Shit, I muttered. I held the phone in my hands as Carlos shined his light into the darkness. And Carlos started to stutter uncontrollably. Are you alright? I asked. It's just so scary and exciting. Let's go, he shouted. His voice echoed through the darkness. To do what is never the right thing to do in a horror movie. Carlos rushed inside. Carlos, what did I say about rushing? I shouted. I reached for him, grabbing at him. Suddenly I felt as he began to fall forward, bringing me with him. I walked as the darkness enveloped us. We fell down a good few feet. Our bodies hit against the hardest floor I ever felt. Shit, Carlos said. He groaned and moaned. I heard his bones pop when he stood up. I glanced up. Damn stairs. I rose up, my back burning with intense pain. I slowly rose upward, feeling my bones pop with each move I made. I turned to see the open door we had come through. What stairs? I said. Looks like the rot took them before anything else. Right at the entrance of the door was only one single step. Carlos pointed his light to the ground. Hey man, your phone. I looked at the spot where his light pointed. My phone was cracked in two. Are you serious? I said, trying to hold back every curse word in the book. Sorry man, he said. I grabbed my phone. Well, I guess the stream's cancelled. I shoved the remains of my phone into my bag. Let's get out of here. You don't want to see what's in here? Carlos asked. To be honest, I'm hurting, cold, and too upset. I just want to go home and unwind. Oh, come on. Let's see what creepy creations he was working on here. He pointed his light further into the room. To our shock, the room itself was very small, almost looking like a normal basement. Along one side of the room was a couple of boxes and steel containers. Another, the one side were more glass containers, like the one in the study. The glass dirty and smudged. I wiped one to see it filled with foliage. I jumped back when I saw a dead centipede. The things were never my favorite insects. Just thinking of them gave me an itch. Man, what was he doing with these things? Carlos asked. I jumped away, shaking off the itch. I don't know, but let's grab these crates and try to build our way up. Sure thing. Carlos continued to look around the room. He stopped when he looked over at the chair. Hey Alan, look, he said. Come on, let's get out of the... I suddenly became full of fight at seeing the person. Don't tell me that's who I think it is. Carlos walked over to the body, aiming his light over it. A suit weathered and dirty, and bandages covering the hands and face. Carlos looked over at me and nodded with a grimace. Yeah, it's Mr. Sonno. I guess we know what happened to him, I said. Okay, let's get out of here. I grabbed a large wooden crate. Carlos? I turned over to him. Hey, Carlos! I freaked when I saw Carlos slowly bring his fingers to Mr. Sonno's face. What are you doing? I want to see what's under the bandages, he said. I'm sure it's just bones. Hell, I'm surprised he can still sit up like that. That's it. I'll take a picture of him with my phone. Then everyone will have to know. Carlos said. Carlos, no, I said. Carlos pulled out his phone. Look here, take a photo. Carlos threw me his phone. I grabbed the phone, not wanting to lose another means to call for help. Carlos, let's just get out of here. He's dead. What can he do? Carlos pulled off one of the bandages that covered Mr. Sonno's eyes. No eyeball, just empty sockets. Okay, you gotta look. Let's go, I said. Give me a minute, Carlos said. Suddenly a low screeching sound emerged from the empty eye socket of Mr. Sonno. What the hell? Carlos peered into the socket, only to jump back in the right time. He fell on his back and screamed out in horror. Carlos? I shouted. I watched in horror as Mr. Sonno rose up. He began to move, but his movements weren't normal, more hectic, like the legs were trying to decide how to move. What the hell? I muttered. Carlos scurried over to me. He wanted to get as far away from Mr. Sonno as possible. He began to move the crate to the door. Let's go, he shouted. Why, what is it? I asked. You don't want to know. I took Carlos's flashlight and aimed it at Mr. Sonno, who was now facing us. I almost gagged at what I saw. Emerged from the piece of bandages that Carlos had removed were about 5 small centipedes. They wiggled and squirmed about over his face. They made a horrible click-clacking sound as they moved about. I watched as more emerged from the bandages, and as others moved around in his body, Carlos shook me. Alan? In that moment, he had built a makeshift staircase. We quickly hurried to the door. I turned back to see the right side of Mr. Sonno's body rip apart, revealing 2 long, twining centipedes forming an arm. The horde of centipedes let out a screeching roar. Carlos grabbed me from the door. He knocked off everything on the desk and pushed it upwards. Alan, help me! I nodded and rushed over. Carlos and I shoved the upward desk to the door. We gathered the chairs and other things in the room to block the opening. We took time to breathe, but that became short-lived when we saw Mr. Sonno standing behind the door, the centipedes reaching out for us. We rushed out of the study, never looking back, the wooden floors creaking under our runs. We dodged the holes Carlos had made on the floor, and finally made it outside. Carlos climbed up on the gates, holding out a hand for me. With that, the 2 of us left that horrible mansion behind. The next day we reported what we experienced. Though my stream was saved before and dropped it, didn't help us prove what we experienced. Yet the police did go investigate it, only to find no body, though the barricade we did make was shown to be broken, though there was no sign of our so-called centipede man. With that, the case was closed. That night will always plague my mind. What was Mr. Sonno doing all this time in that mansion? Did he happen to be killed by a horde of his centipedes? Or did they just assume his form? Who's to say? The event will never have an answer. But what I do know is that Mr. Sonno, or as he is now known as the Centipede Man, is out there wiggling and squirming about in the night. So some backstory first. I met my friend at a small apartment complex when I was around 6 or 7. Blah blah blah, my family moved. Fast forward a few years, my friend's family moved too. For the sake of simplicity, we'll call him James. James' family moved to his grandmother's home way out in the country. We kept in contact. Every once in a while, I'd go out to spend a few nights. Now James had a firm belief in the supernatural, along with his family. He'd tell me of the ghosts in the surrounding woods and in the home. Now being kids, we were easily scared. Shadows vaguely shaped like people would scare us. The older we grew, he'd tell me more of what he saw. Once he said he saw his great-grandmother walk by him. Now my whole life, I've suffered from sleep paralysis, so when James explained his latest sighting, I just shrugged it off. He said that he had seen a man with long hair and a thick beard crawling on his ceiling. He did explain further how he couldn't move while it neared him. He said that when he was able to move again, that it had disappeared. It shook him up for a bit, but things returned to normal a few weeks later. I remember the last birthday of his we celebrated together. It was normal at first. He had invited me and a couple other friends. We played some games, including his shiny new copy of Halo 5. We later ended up outside. We walked around the giant field that acted as James' backyard. Me, James, and another friend, we'll call Andrew, were walking back when we saw 2 white orbs glowing just behind the tree line. We ignored it, coming to the conclusion that it was just a couple odd mushrooms. I looked back when we reached the house. There were no orbs. You might say they were just out of view, but from the angle we saw, we still would have been able to see them. I didn't mention my findings. A while later I spent the night again. Andrew was there too. We went to bed late. We talked for a bit and watched a bit of TV before we all finally fell asleep. I woke up at some point in the morning before the sunrise. I quickly realized I couldn't move. Like I said, I've experienced this before, so I simply relaxed and focused on wiggling my toes. That's when I saw it. A man peeking around the doorframe. His face was a shade whiter than snow, and it appeared he was upside down. I panicked. I had seen and heard things during sleep paralysis. Shadow people, animals, things moving, anything you can think of. But this was simply too vivid. I jolted up the second I could move, and quickly turned to where the man was staring at me. Nothing. I relaxed and put the sighting up to a mix of stress and the power of suggestion. The other two hadn't woken to my sudden alertness. The day continued normally, and I went home. Life continued as normal. Things got worse. I started seeing the man more. Now, before you yell at me for continuing to visit, there was some things going on with James' family. I'm not going to say what happened, as it's not my place. Essentially, James needed a distraction, so even with the man, there I stayed. Everything came to a head at one night. We retreated to his room as darkness fell. It didn't take long for us to fall asleep. I woke from a stress dream. I heard shoes dragging against plaster. I knew what I was about to see. I went to focus on moving my toes, thinking that I was paralyzed. My whole world crashed when my arm moved, and I still heard the dragging. I froze, this time out of fear. I saw his face, then his shoulders, then his torso. I averted my gaze back to the bed. I saw James staring at the thing slowly dragging itself closer. His eyes were filled with terror. Then he looked down at me. He spoke with a shaky voice. "You can see it too?" It was a question, just him confirming his own sighting. We didn't move a muscle as the thing moved closer. I could hear the man's bones creaking and his breath hitch with every lurch forward. I noticed a thin strand of blood trailing from his right eye. It was going down his face towards his mouth, and considering how he hung from the ceiling, that was simply impossible. The man, no, monster, hung over me. It pushed itself onto its knees, then its feet. It stood on the ceiling. Its face was merely inches from my own. I met its gaze. Its eyes were a milky white. Pain filled its dead eyes, as if moving filled it with an indiscernible amount of pain. It silently begged for help. I could hear his screams. Even though he was completely silent, blue sunlight began to fill the room and the man simply disappeared. James sat frozen in fear for hours. Eventually I moved to retrieve my phone. I called my mom and asked if she could pick me up. I never returned to that home, and me and James never speak of it. James and his family moved away due to aforementioned issues. As soon as I could, I moved to a small town halfway across the country. I got a job at a gas station and continued with my life. I got over it. So why am I telling you all this now? I saw a pale face peeking around the corner of the back room at work. For as long as I can remember, I have had a guardian angel. He was my best friend, and he has never left my side. As a young child, my mom often found me seemingly conversing with myself in my bedroom, with laughter in my voice. She always assumed I was speaking to an imaginary friend, since I was at the age where it wouldn't make sense to have one. When she asked me about him, I'd simply say, "Oh, I'm just playing with my guardian angel, Mama. Can't you see him?" She always laughed at that, and said she didn't, but that was because he wasn't her guardian angel. None of my classmates could see him either, and often made fun of me when they saw me speaking to my angel, saying that I was a baby or just crazy. Life at my school was difficult during that time. My classmates were relentless when it came to their teasing, and no matter how many times they were chastised by my teachers, they'd continue with their bullying and mockery. My guardian angel didn't like that very much. It wasn't common for him to yank on a girl's ponytail hard enough to make her cry, or move a chair out as someone moved to sit down at the last second, causing them to fall on their butts. I know it wasn't right of him to do that, but at the time, I loved it. He was just trying to protect me. Then one day, my principal called my mom and asked her to come to the school immediately for a parent and teacher conference. Mom panicked when she heard the cautious tone in Mr. Noriega's voice and thought something had happened between me and another classmate. Mom knew that they had been picking on me for quite some time, so she rushed from home, ready to face whatever she was about to walk into. When she got to the school, the front desk lady quickly escorted her to the guardian's counselor's office, where she found my principal, the counselor, my teacher, and myself waiting. That was something she was not expecting. They went through the introductions and answered my mom's immediate question, "Is my daughter alright?" Mr. Noriega assured her I was fine, which was evident given there wasn't anything physically wrong with me, and then proceeded to tell her the reason why she was asked to come. My teacher was receiving several complaints from students and parents about me being an aggressive child, who terrorized my classmates and scared them with my stories of my guardian angel. At first, most of the injuries were minor. A braid being yanked hard, a quick smack across the face by a phantom hand. These instances were dismissed as whimsy, told by young children. That day, however, a student had been hurt badly when an errant baseball hurtled itself into the back of their head. He had to be rushed to the hospital, where he was lying in a coma. Miss Castle never flat out said I was the one to throw the ball, but it was obvious that she, along with Mr. Noriega and the counselor, thought I had thrown the ball in retaliation for something. My mom could only stare at the adults in the room, but didn't seem to understand how any of that involved me. When she finally asked why I was there, Miss Castle replied, before the student lost consciousness, he claimed that Anna's guardian angel had done it. Just before recess, the student had been particularly awful to your daughter and had smashed her art project we had been working on. I shrank into my chair as she said this, worried that I had indeed caused this, but not knowing how. My mom was furious, however, that they were heavily implying I had been the one to throw the ball and seriously hurt the kid. When she asked for solid proof that I had done something, none of the other adults could provide it. Regardless, they were concerned that I was a safety hazard for the other students, and were not sure of how to proceed. My mom angrily shouted, "What do you mean, safety hazard? Are you kidding me? You honestly want to pin an accident on my daughter's old imaginary friend?" The guardian counselor looked grave as she responded, "Your daughter collaborated the student's story. She admitted that it was her guardian angel that threw the ball. Since we know the guardian angel is merely an imaginary friend, it stands to reason that your daughter was the one to throw the ball. That doesn't mean a damn thing. Unless someone saw her throw that ball and hit that kid, you have nothing." With that, she beckoned me to follow, and pulled me out of the school right then and there. The next day, she enrolled me at another elementary school. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise for me. While at my old school, I was teased and attacked daily, and had no friends. At my new school, no one knew about my angel or what happened to my classmate. I never spoke about him, for fear that the same thing would happen again. After a while, I began to make friends, and found a small group of classmates who I became very close to. It was truly one of the best times of my life. Then, we graduated from elementary to middle school. It was then that things took a turn for the worst. Middle school combined all of the elementary school students together, which meant that I was going to have to face my old classmates. It didn't take long for the old stories to circulate, and before long, everyone knew about my guardian angel and the boy I had supposedly hurt. After that, people started to treat me differently. Some were even outright cruel. What was worse was that some of the teachers and staff believed the stories, and all but encouraged the bullying as well as participating in it themselves. My history teacher was one of them. For some reason, Mrs. Engel never really seemed to like me before the stories were spread, and they seemed to have confirmed some suspicions she had about me. After that, she made sure to make me as miserable as she could, inside and outside of class. I often ended up in detention for even the tiniest of indiscretions, or sent to the principal's office if I took too long coming back from the restroom. One day, Mrs. Engel came to work in a very foul mood. She looked like she was in the beginning stages of a head cold, as evident by the soiled facial tissue littering her desk. Her eyes and nose were considerably redder than the rest of her face, and her voice sounded like she had spent the night coughing up a lung. When class started, she angrily rose from her chair and began to recite the lesson for the day in a fast clip. The hoarseness of her voice, however, made it hard to understand her, and I could tell that I was not the only one having difficulty taking notes. When she mentioned that she would be testing us tomorrow on the lesson, I raised my hand to ask her to clarify some of the things she said. I really didn't want to draw attention to myself, but I also didn't want to fail the test either. When she saw my hand in the air, she huffed and said, "What could you possibly want, Anna? I'm trying to teach a class." I responded in a meek voice that I just wanted her to repeat some parts of the lesson so I could make sure I had it correctly. This seemed to upset her even more than she already was. In a mocking, slow and loud voice, she repeated what she said. My classmates giggled quietly at first, and then got louder with each word my teacher uttered until they practically drowned out her voice. When she finished, she asked, "Do you understand now? Or do I need to say it again slower?" By that point, I was in tears and did the only thing I could think of. I bolted to the girls' restroom and barricaded myself in one of the stalls. There, I broke into racking sobs, tears streaming down my face in great rivers. My guardian angel was there with me, reflecting the sorrow I felt back to me. After one particularly anguished sob, he knelt down next to me and placed his inky black hand on my knee. I couldn't feel his touch, but I felt his desire to calm my sobbing. Gradually, I began to slow down until all that was left were small sniffles. I hate them. I hate them all. I especially hate her. Why can't they leave me alone? Angel, you're my only friend. You're my best friend. The next day, my teacher didn't show up for work, and we all assumed it was due to her cold. The day after that, our guidance counselor quit her job and was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. 5 days after being admitted, she committed suicide. Her note claimed she saw the shadow person everywhere and knew it was coming to kill her. At the time, none of the other teachers or principal explained what had happened to them. They announced over the intercom that my teacher had passed away and that the guidance counselor would no longer be working there. Any questions we had were ignored. I didn't find out what happened to my teacher or why the counselor had to be institutionalized until years later. You see, the day my teacher died, she hadn't called into work. She hadn't responded to any texts or phone calls asking where she was. My guidance counselor was sent to her home to make sure everything was okay. The front door was unlocked. Inside, she found my teacher in the living room. On the wall hung my teacher's skin. In the middle of the room lay my teacher with her organs and bones on the outside, as though she was somehow turned inside out. What was worse, her heart was still beating above her sternum. When she saw the counselor, she had tried to ask for help, but found it impossible given her tongue was no longer on the inside of her mouth. When she was questioned by the police, my counselor told them she saw a shadow person standing over Mrs. Engel's body. She saw my teacher's eyes widen in terror and gave a truly horrific scream. The shadow person, she said, felt like it was enjoying torturing my teacher. Then without warning, stomped on every bone until they were reduced to pebbles, then finally stomped on her heart. Mrs. Engel had screamed the entire time. I never asked my angel whether he was responsible for what happened until last night. Last night, he had put his hand on my knee once again, but instead of calm, I felt a ferocious rage emanating from him. When I asked him if he had killed my teacher, he slowly nodded. I shook my head, knowing I should be terrified of what he had done, but all I could feel was anguish over what had just happened to me. The only fear I felt was for my boyfriend, who just violently attacked me after coming home drunk from the bar. I wish you could have stopped him before he did all this to me, I told him. Angel, you truly are my only friend. I love you. The police rushed in moments later, having been alerted to what was going on by a neighbor who had heard screaming from our apartment. They quickly arrested Adrian, and I was rushed to the emergency room to be evaluated. My guardian angel didn't follow me. He followed Adrian. They found him in his cell this morning. His body was turned inside out, and his skin was hanging on the wall. Beside his skin on the left was his tongue. To the right were more body parts. The guard who found him claimed his heart was also beating before it was stomped out by a black shadow person. People always say that shadow people are dangerous, that they want to kill you, but from what I know, that isn't the case. They are loving and protective. They are true friends. Shadow people are our guardian angels. They're here to protect us or avenge us if something happens. So if someone tells you they've been attacked by shadow people, think of my story and ask yourself, what did they do? Immediate job opening. The headline of the ad read, drawing my attention. Looking for applicants in need of immediate employment to watch over local estates before liquidation. Their excessive quantity of exclamation points was a tad bit annoying, but it certainly wasn't enough to deter me from emailing in my resume. After a couple of weeks, I'd been called in for an interview that seemed to go just as stressful as my other job interview, and I sat through a 20-person orientation, complete with interactive improv application of skills. Then I sat at home waiting till they called with my first job. I started 3 days later, and my first few jobs were fairly simple. Always the same thing. Watch over this old house and its contents, For a few days till the lawyers can sort out the estate. We were given the job as a 3-man rotation, 9 hours each, so that there was an overlap just long enough between switch off for you to sit and talk, updating each other on your uneventful day. Usually, to help pass the time, we'd go through some of the belongings. Now, this was just against the company's protocol, but even the senior members who had done this job for years did it, so I just shrugged and joined in. We saw a lot of interesting things, and sometimes we'd find the kind of stuff no one ever wanted the world to see, but nothing illegal or outright creepy. Some of the older members would try to scare a few of the new people with tales of ghost hauntings. Anyone who stole from their estates, though, I'm sure they are about as factual as Jim down the street telling me he shot a 12-point buck, but it got taken from him by a mountain lion. Now, I'm not saying old Jimmy boy can't shoot a deer. I'm just saying mountain lions aren't known to frequent the Great Smoky Mountains. Of course, there were times when I had that late night shift, and I'll admit, my mind had been playing tricks on me from time to time in those big, dark houses. Nothing a good, rational boy couldn't reason away. Can't be afraid of spooks all your life, right? That is until one mansion came up. I can't say the name of the family who used to own it. Part of an NDA we all signed taking this job in particular. What I can say is this place was massive and beautiful. The stairwell had hand-carved wooden railings, huge great hall with a gigantic fireplace, a full restaurant-style kitchen. The bathrooms, 6 at least, had each their own unique tiling depicting a Greek or Roman deity, and they had a south garden you could walk through that would make you feel like you were in a tropical rainforest, littered with stone statues. I fell in love with this house when I saw it. I was the one who drew the short straw, night shifts in this museum of a house. I remember making a joking remark of how I would grow so bored looking through the treasures inside. I also remember feeling a strange unease as soon as I finished making that joke. Nothing was unusual for the first few days. Checked all the halls, made sure the doors were all locked, and did a full round of the property, which was large enough they gave us a golf cart to drive. Those simple tasks took a good 2 hours. But once they were finished, I had nothing else to do but play on my phone, watch the 4 monitors in front of me, read a book, or of course the most interesting, snooping through boxes and old dressers. On the 5th night, I came upon an old, leather-bound book. It had no title on the cover, or the spine, but it had 2 letters I assumed to be the author's initials, J.H. I flipped through the first few pages of the old book, and noted that it seemed to be self-published. I took the book back with me to my post and began to read. The story was of a young knight and his priest companion purging an evil from an old, forgotten castle. The knight's name was Sir Roderick Caldwell, of somewhere forgettable, and the priest was Father Mark Richardson. The more I read, the more I loved the story, and couldn't put it down. Soon dawn was upon me, and the day shift replacement was talking off my ear. I slipped the book into the bottom drawer of our desk, and told him he should read it, but to not lose my page. That day while I slept, I had terrible nightmares of being chased through a long, endless corridor by some fat creature with a huge toothy grin. I woke up several times, just before it caught me, but each time I went back to sleep, there I was again, running for my life. I chalked it up to an over-imagination, and the Latin effect of reading the strange old book's tale. After I got to work, I made my round quickly so I could settle in with my book as early as possible. However, not long after I started reading, strange things started happening. Monitor 3 started going black sometimes, not off, just like something had been placed over the lens. I went to check it each time, but nothing was covering it, and when I returned to the desk, the monitor was fine. Now, camera 3 faced that south garden I mentioned earlier, and it was mounted up on the bottom of the roof line for a 3-story house. So I was certain it wasn't someone playing tricks on me. I did, however, assume it was a bird making a nest up around the camera and occasionally blocking the lens. Thus it didn't take me long to ignore it. Besides that, I began to hear a low chuckle, like a deep guttural laugh, come from deep inside the house. Now this gave me a very weird, uneasy feeling, but I kept telling myself it had to be the wind or the old house itself groaning, and my creeped out mind was just interpreting it as a laugh. I should have put the book down and investigated, but instead, I slipped on my headphones and turned on some calming music while I continued reading. By the time morning shift got there, Sir Caldwell and Father Richardson were in the middle of a violent scene where they fought off the growing demonic will of the castle that tried to eat away at their very own consciousness. I cursed, having to put it down, but slipped a sticky note in to hold my exact sentence. I could hardly sleep between my excitement for the next few chapters of the book and the ever-persistent nightmares of that toothy being. I ended up making a full pot of tea and reserving myself to watching Netflix till I passed out on the couch. I think I made it through 3, maybe 4 episodes of The Office before finding myself in the mansion. No long corridor, and no toothy beast chasing me. Just me, the desk, and the book. Smiling, I remember picking up the book to read it, but all the pages were blank. I flipped the pages back and forth, even held the book upside down like typed letters would fall out of it or something. I snapped awake around 5 p.m. with little knowledge, if there was more to that dream. Back at work the following evening, I was more reserved going to the book, took my time with the rounds, and even spent a bit of extra time looking around camera 3. No nest in sight, by the way. When I finally got back to the desk, I played on my phone for a couple of hours. Monitor 3 did not go black, but I did still hear the low laughing wind a few times. My will was strong, but not nearly strong enough, as by this point, I broke out my lunch and with it cracked open the book. I got through another chapter when movement on the monitor caught my attention. There it was, Monitor 3, where one of the statues should be. The rotund, ugly black mass with a huge impossible toothy grin. It just stared at me, and I stared back. It couldn't be real. I closed my eyes and opened them, and he was gone. I put the book down, not caring about my spot, and instantly went to the coffee machine. I rarely drank the stuff, but I was seeing stuff that I should not, hell, could not be there. The beast from my dreams was just standing there. I kept looking over at the monitor expecting it to be there again. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I didn't pick up the book, except to put it back on the drawer. For 2 days I slept okay, and didn't read the book, but after a while, I told myself I had been silly, and simply saw something because of my lack of sleep that evening. The next night shift, I found my spot and read through a few chapters, not noticing anything unusual. Maybe I had my back to the monitors. Maybe I didn't. Can't really say for sure. But I guess that didn't help any. As I looked up and noticed something equally as impossible. Just down the hall from me was an open door. That in of itself is impossible, as I had certainly checked it to be locked like the others. But the truly terrifying aspect is the light is on, but all the breakers for the house are off, except the ones needed for our station and the cameras. I grabbed my bag and just left the estate, went straight to my car and drove home. Didn't stop for shit. I called the company the next day and told them I quit. They threatened to withhold my check, but at that point, I honestly didn't care. That was a couple of weeks ago, and I still have nightmares about that black demon with the wide grin. I just started cleaning out my old work bag and noticed I accidentally stole that old book. Guess at least I can finish the tale and see how Sir Caldwell dealt with the demon in the ancient castle. Okay, so earlier today, I had an encounter with the goat man thing. Yeah, I know. You're like, here we go again, right? But seriously, I'm not on any drugs. I don't have a history of making shit up either. But just listen to what I went through today, and make your decision afterwards. Or don't. I don't care either way. But if you live in the southern east rural area of North Carolina, you should stay out of the woods at all costs. All the stories you've undoubtedly heard about the goat man are probably wrong. For starters, it looked 9 feet tall. It had sharp teeth and was heavily built, but the most disturbing thing was that it smiles when it sees you. A few seconds will go by before it releases a disgusting laugh. This creature was covered in blood and what appeared to be human brains. I know all of this because I came across it on my midday shift. I'm a cop. So me and my partner, who I'll call Nathan, approached a call we got from a widow living in a 2-story house in the countryside. She said it was something killing off her cattle, and she thought they were being poached, and gave the footprints in the mud as her reasoning. The dispatch told us she honestly sounded insane, but since it was a first-time caller, we had to at least check it out. When we got there, I knocked on the door for any additional info, while my partner checked the area around the remaining cattle. I knocked a few more times and still hadn't gotten an answer or reply yet, so I turned around and decided to join him over there as well. But when I got there, he was nowhere to be found. Just as I had thought, I hear a stomach-turning scream from the tree line. I draw my weapon and head towards the source of the sound, thinking an animal must have startled Nate. But what I saw when I got there was insane. It was a large white furry creature, with horns standing upright, with a large axe. He had Nate pinned against a tree. I got there right before the creature raised the axe and brought it down on Nate's head with so much force and speed that his head exploded on impact and burst like a watermelon being dropped from a jet. All I can see when I close my eyes now is his brains and eyeballs being fired out of his head like some kind of sick, human head version of a party pop streamer. The thing then whipped his head backwards in a 360-degree motion and started laughing like a hyena before turning his entire body around to fit the direction of his head. Then it starts walking towards me like the boogeyman from WWE. But I saw all of that last part from the safety of my police cruiser, because I hauled ass as soon as I saw that big, ugly motherfucker. A bit of description about myself. I'm a 27-year-old gay male. This happened when I was 15. I was dating this guy I'm gonna call Johnny. Things were great other than the fact he was stupid. And I don't mean that kind of stupid. I mean like he would ask me or say stupid things. But anyway, we were sitting in his room playing video games, and his brother, who we will call Ricky, appears out of nowhere and scared the crap out of me. And he laughed a creepy laugh. My boyfriend said he had to go to the bathroom, and his brother was still in the doorway and staring at me. So me being a smartass, I said, "Can I help you?" He said nothing as he started to walk towards me and went to touch my face. But before his hand reached me, Johnny pushed him and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing? Leave him alone." This happened every time we hung out, but never with any of his other friends. Long story short, 4 months later, and we broke up, but stayed friends to this day. But after the breakup, things with Ricky got really bad. He would tell Johnny that he wasn't good enough for me, and that he could give me the world. So one day, me and Johnny were hanging out watching movies and talking about guys we liked. Then walks in Ricky. But before he could say anything to me, their mom walks in and tells Ricky to go to the store with her. As they leave, Johnny says, "I need to show you something." He leads me to Ricky's room, and then we walk in. I'm shocked because Ricky has pictures of me everywhere. I started freaking out and said I need to go home, which was about a 20-minute walk. I started grabbing my stuff when Ricky and his mom walked in, and Johnny asked if he could walk me home, but I said no, and rushed out of the house saying goodnight to his mom. As I'm walking, it was starting to get dark. It was about 9 p.m., I think. Now my dad has always told me to carry a knife on me, but I thought nothing could ever happen to me, so I didn't because I wasn't thinking. I continued down the street when I felt like I was being followed. But I'm already a paranoid person, so I was tense already. But I didn't look over my shoulder. But then, the feeling got stronger. Like I could feel their thirst. It freaked me out, so I peeked over my shoulder, and it was Ricky following me. I didn't speed up, just kept walking the pace I was going, and was gonna run before he was close enough. Before I knew it, he was right behind me, and I heard a click, and I instantly knew it was a knife. Since everyone in my family carries a knife, I decided to run all the way home and not look over my shoulder. No offense to anyone, but I seen the movies. I'm not gonna fall. Well, I had hoped he wouldn't follow me, but he did. He chased me all the way home. I started crying because I knew I should have brought my knife, or let Johnny walk me home. I made it home safely, and I can see him in the corner staring at me. Now that I'm older, he stalks me from a distance, but won't come anywhere near me. So Ricky, if you're hearing this, I'll hurt you if you come near me. I carry at all times since moving here, but please note, the laws in my state for carries is a lot more strict than your average open carry states. In this case, you could argue I had the right to show I was armed. I conceal carry, or otherwise, but in that moment, I made the choice to not pull or even brandish my weapon. This happened about a month ago now. For context, I am a 21-year-old female with 2 dogs living alone. One of my dogs is a 95-pound pit bull, while the other is a 10-month-old small corgi mix. This is all important later. I live in a lower duplex where my front door faces the alley, where I take my 2 dogs to the bathroom multiple times a day, since moving in 7 months prior to this incident. At around 8 p.m., after a night full of Taco Bell and playing Sims, I decided to take my dogs potty one last time before bed. I leashed up both of them and put on my coat and headed towards the small grassed area in the alley. While they were doing their thing, I saw 2 lights above me go out, removing all light from the alley all the way up until my back door. I took out my phone, turning on the flash so I could see my dogs still in case I needed to clean up after them. After turning my phone light on, I quickly looked up from my dogs to see a man wearing baggy clothes and a hood standing 20 feet from me. He must have been standing there a while since my dogs didn't hear him walk up or even notice him at all. I didn't realize I was shining my light directly at him, and for a moment, I felt bad doing this, since that was clearly rude. That was until I saw that he was dead-ass glaring at me. I stood there uncomfortable for a moment, wondering if I should keep walking them or try to turn and walk back. During this time, he decided to start walking towards me. I told myself he could be just trying to get to his car or something in the alley, until I realized he was walking directly towards me, setting off both dogs. Being scared shitless, I started to walk backwards, hoping to get out of his way, and definitely hoping he was just going to walk past me. Nope. Walking backwards triggered him to start to sprint. Not only that, but the guy then starts chanting as he did it, loudly. I couldn't make out a word he was even saying, but he kept repeating and chanting as he sprinted towards me. At this point, I kept going back and forth on taking action, but to be completely honest, I was scared shitless to the point where I couldn't decide what to do. Thankfully, when in arm's reach, my dog reached his limit with the guy and lunged, snapping him out of whatever state of mind he was in. He then began to sing. Yeah, the dude stops only a few feet from me, smiles, and turns away from me singing loudly as he walked past. Keep in mind my dogs are still lunging for the guy. I stood there frozen watching him walk down the alley and crossing the street to the next neighborhood's alley. I didn't move the entire time, due to my front door being the next house from where I was standing, so he didn't see where I walked in. Once I saw him cross the street, I ran, dragging both dogs behind me to my door, locking it behind me. Turning off all of my lights, I called the police, who said they would send someone to patrol the area. They didn't seem too concerned with someone ugly crying, barely able to explain what happened. After hanging up, I sat on the floor on the phone with my mom instead. Pathetic, I know. During this, I see my motion sense light flip on. Keep in mind you have to be directly in front of my unit for the thing to turn on. Freaking out, I called the police again, asking if there was an officer in my alley, hoping at least. To which, of course, she said there is no officer on my side of town currently, to which I explained the motion sensor light, turning on and off, and she explained to stay on the line while I peek through my shutters to see if he's out there. You guessed it, dude was pacing in front of my unit. When the dispatcher heard my panic and explained what I was seeing, she then sent an officer over. She asked me to turn my lights back on in hopes it would scare him off in case he planned to rob the place. While keeping my eyes on him between the shutters, I turned on my living room light, this catching his attention. He stops pacing and stares directly where I'm standing, not moving. He begins to mouth something quickly, while starting to which I assumed was the chant I heard earlier. Thankfully, he turned away from me, and kept walking at this point, the dispatcher informing me the officer was now in my area, to which I assumed he saw, and is why he kept walking. The dispatcher, who was very sweet and calming, thank God, informed me the officers would find him and give me an update. I never heard back from the officers. I'm assuming they caught up with him. I'm assuming he saw the cop car, which is why he left. I can't be sure, but that's what I tell myself. I have since called my landlord to get in touch with the power company to get those lights back on in the alley, which, to no surprise, they have yet to fix. I can't be sure those lights went off in coincidence or not. This may not be as scary of an ending as some of the stuff posted on here, but I'm grateful for my dogs being there, having a parent who works in the mental health field, I didn't feel showing I was armed would do any good in the situation. I've been told since he did not sound like he was in a good state of mind, and that if I did anything different, it might have triggered a worse behavior, rather than him snapping out of it by my dogs. I hope the guy found some help, but for the love of God, don't come back.